things. If you want to offer that as an amendment, it's certainly your right to do so.
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Can I ask another question, though?
Sure.
And this is the second point, and that is that there doesn't seem to be any history of the constitutional revisions since the last convention in the report. Is there a need to maybe look at some of that, just in terms of background?
So you would consider adding to the report things that have happened through the other process by which something can become.
Well, for example, there was no convention in 1994, but the General Assembly downsized the legislature from 100 reps to 75, 50 senators to 38, and they also put on the ballot that no legislature would receive a state pension. And then fast forward, I think it was Common Cause who came up with separation of powers, and that in 2004 was on the ballot. If the whole purpose of this, as it says, is to offer voters assistance, I don't know if any historical background is necessary or not. I mean, at the end of the day, it's whatever the voters decide, whether it's a legislature or a convention, and the only way the Constitution is changed is by a majority vote of the people. Thank you.
Go ahead. Yes, it is.
Yes, if you could use your microphone.
Sorry, Chairman.
Would you like to offer an amendment?
I'd like to offer an amendment. At first, I'd like to mention it, and then I'll pass out a hard copy for everybody, if that's possible.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. The amendment is related to the cost issue. I have a concern about the cost issue we are including in this report. First of all, our charter, our duty is to discuss assemble information on constitutional issues. It's not to assemble information on the cost of a constitutional convention. Those are two different things to me, number one. And number two, when I look at the convention discussion in this document, we talk about the 1986 convention, but we do not mention the cost of the 1973 convention, which we heard testimony on from Mr. Partridge, who was a participant and said it cost $20,000. We also did not include testimony from two witnesses who said that a cost of a convention could be offset by amendments that were actually included, that would actually be adopted, for instance, like a line item veto potentially, or the elimination of the Lieutenant Governor's office. So I think to have a complete discussion about the cost, you have to use not just one convention, but another recent convention we heard testimony on, and we should indicate that there could be cost savings to offset it. My preference would be to have no mention of the cost, but to try to balance and cooperate with others who want that in here. So I'm going to provide that right now. It'll just take me 30 seconds to pass this out to everybody.
Okay, if you could hand it to staff, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that for you.
I'm sorry, I'm used to doing things for myself.
No problem. So just to be clear, you are moving to amend to change the language to this is like a red line?
That's a red line.
Okay.
The only red line to my red line is when you said the number 2.5. I wasn't sure what the number was going to be, so I put 2.5, and you'll see it in my pencil mark to my red line. And if you'll notice, there are two versions. One is a version to eliminate the entire section. The other is to include a balanced approach to discussing the cost estimate.
Okay, so what we will do is we'll give the committee members a few minutes here to digest this, and then we will take that as two separate motions to amend the report.
I could just get a sense from people, if they really want the cost estimate in there, I'll try to work with everybody and just use the first version, which includes cost estimates from both the 73 and 86.
Okay.
You know.
Senator Dawson? I'm sorry, Senator Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Frias raises an excellent point with regard to the state's full experience of hosting or of paying for constitutional conventions. I certainly respect his point that it's not explicitly in our charter to provide the cost estimate to the convention, but maybe that's a purist view of our charter, and it's not against the public interest to give them a factually based description of the state's experience funding a constitutional convention. But I think it is very important that, as he proposes, we include the historical experience that we know confidently. In 1973, it cost about $20,000. I just think that's erring on the side of full disclosure to the public and letting the numbers speak for themselves. And I'd be prepared to second that motion.
Okay, so Mr. Frias has moved that we change the language as he has handed out. Senator Hodgson has seconded that motion. Now we are on discussion. We had some of that with Senator Hodgson. Is there any further discussion? Yes, Representative Ruggiero?
Yes, I have a question. If the cost of the convention in 1973 was $20,000, adjusting to inflation, you're saying in 2016 it would be $107,000, but yet the actual cost in 1986 was $891,000. So how could it possibly be $107 in 2016 if it was $891 in 1986?
Because the difference is, may I, Chair,
Yes,
can I respond to the- I'm not as used to this as all of you. My response is the 1973 convention lasted for a shorter period of time than the 1986 convention. They put forward 7 ballot questions versus 14. It was a shorter convention. They got it done quicker and they got it done faster. Some conventions move rapidly and get things done quicker. Other conventions take longer. It's just a matter of how the convention conducts itself. The General Assembly in 1973, I believe, appropriated $20,000. They stayed within the budget. The 1986 convention, they had to come back a couple of times to get appropriations from my reading of the 1986 public laws and I believe 1987 public laws.
So how do you keep a convention on time and on budget?
My point is not, that's not my point is, I'm not trying to get into a discussion of how a convention should conduct itself. I'm just pointing out that there is a spectrum of what a convention can cost. Mm-hmm. And that's my purpose for this amendment, is to disclose on one end versus another end.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
In terms of further discussion, I'm going to say that my recollection of Mr. Partridge's testimony was he did use the $20,000 number, but I don't think that was a hard and fast number. I think he was trying to remember and he wasn't certain. So just want to say that in terms of further discussion. Representative,
can I? I'm not a representative. Sorry. Can I respond?
Sure,
can I
Mr.
respond?
Price. Sure.
I have a document with me from the October 1973 proceeding indicating that the budget was going to fall about $500 below $20,000.
Okay.
If you need authentication.
Okay. Well, I was going to wait and what I'm thinking is I'm going to wait and see how your amendment fares, and then perhaps suggest another amendment after that, dealing with 73. But we are on Mr. Frias's amendment. Any further discussion? Ms. Jones.
Well, I know that this was an issue that came up in a number of times in public testimony. So it's obviously a question that is on people's minds, what it would cost. And I think, again, anytime there is, and I think the voters deserve to know what this might cost. Most pieces of legislation that would involve expenditures have a fiscal note, and I would consider the $2.5 million or whatever was suggested as an appropriate fiscal note for this project for the convention. So I think it's important to have that figure in there for the public to consider as they decide if they want the convention or not.
Chairman McCaffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree that we probably should put the figure from 73 in. However, I think in your own testimony you indicated that there are a number of variables out there that could escalate the figure or decrease the figure, yet you're deleting that language in here.
Could I respond? If you wish to make an amendment to my red line to say that it could be a range.
I don't think the range, I mean, there's variables out there that we don't know. Like you said, they were a lot longer in 1986 versus 73. There were a lot more referendum that came to the ballot, which obviously would increase the costs of the convention. That we don't know if there is a convention what it's going to be, or how much it's going to cost, or how much staffing is going to be necessary to research the various issues.
May I respond?
Frias.
My point is that if we're trying to do a cost estimate, you have to use the spectrum of variables. So we're using we should not use just one example to estimate the cost. You should have different other examples. So because we had testimony from 1973 from a participant I was able to track down a document authenticating the cost. I thought, here's one convention that was very short, here's one convention that was long. That's all I'm trying to indicate, is to give the voters a range, because I agree with you, Senator McCaffrey. We don't know exactly how the convention will be conducted. The two things I know is there's been a range, and that the General Assembly has the decision-making power to decide how much to authorize in spending.
So, Mr. Frias, I think I am opposed to your red line as written, although I agree with Senator McCaffrey that you raise a good point that maybe the 73 information should be included in this. But as far as the rest of the red line, I think those changes are pretty substantial, and I don't know that I would favor those. Is there any further discussion on Senator Picard?
It's more of a procedural question. We're voting on the First Amendment here? Because there's two, correct?
I don't believe he's offered that quite yet. Right now we're voting on the change in language that is handed out. That yes.
He has two amendments.
Not that one.
The first one.
Right.
Yes, that was the one that Senator Dawson Hodgson seconded, was the one that has the cost from both conventions.
Not the one striking the whole.
One striking the
whole
entire cost estimate. If I can't get this one passed, I won't get the other one passed.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, so we have a motion and a second. The motion is to change the report to reflect the red line that Mr. Frias has passed out. All in favor of that? 2 in favor, 3 in favor, including Representative Giarrusso. All opposed?
Nay.
Nay. And the motion to amend fails. With that, I will offer a motion to amend the report as currently written to add directly in front of the sentence that reads, the Constitutional Convention in 1986 was held at a total cost to taxpayers of $891,000. Before that, I move to amend it to add the Constitutional Convention held in 1973 was held at a total cost to taxpayers of, and then whatever the correct number is. Mr. Frias, you have the document. Certainly you can give that to staff, and staff can research it and insert that number.
I'd like to second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Seconded by Senator Hodgson. Is there any discussion? Ms. Jones.
Well, that $20,000 figure, or whatever it is in that range, was from a convention that was held 40 years ago. And I just think putting that figure in there is going to really give the wrong impression, because it's hard to imagine that the next one, if the voters approve, could do it on $20,000. But I think in some ways you set up that expectation by putting that figure in there. So I just think it's not helpful.
Well, I understand your point. I think this commission is charged with gathering information and getting it out to the people and allowing them to make a decision. Mr. Frias makes some points about there have been 2 of them in modern history. I agree the 73 convention, I personally agree the 73 convention was an oddity. It's much more likely to go a lot longer, as it did in '86, and cost a lot more money. Frankly, I think the $2.5 million in this day and age is probably a low number, but I don't see how getting the information out and letting people know about it and draw their own conclusions is hurtful. So is there any further discussion on my amendment? Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. My question is that 20,000, is that an actual number, or is that just an estimate?
Well, my motion is for staff, which I have the greatest confidence in, to find the actual number from 1973, which I'm sure can be ascertained, and use that number. So I seem to recall Mr. Partridge's testimony as remembering that from a long time ago. Mr. Frias says he has a document that shows it to be slightly less than $20,000. So I'm sure staff can figure out what the actual number was as they did in '86 and insert it. Any further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposition? Ms. Jones in opposition. Okay, the motion to amend passes. Are there any further amendments that members would like to offer? Okay, with that, sorry, Mr. Freyes.
Chairman Keeble, on the amendment I also had a revised conclusion paragraph. If you look at it, what I tried to do was smooth out the language to make it clear that there are two processes to amend our Constitution, one through the General Assembly, one through a Constitutional Convention, and that both processes require a majority vote of the voters. And I eliminated the sentence about if a Constitutional Convention is not called in 2015, the General Assembly may put a question on the ballot. The reason I eliminated that is that it's somewhat confusing. There was no testimony to that effect at this hearing at all. I have seen no discussion of that possibility in any news account. The historical practice has been if the Constitutional Convention was not approved in 1994, 2004, the General Assembly did not put it. I see no reason to put this in other than as a theoretical statement not supported by anyone at this hearing, and it could lead to confusion.
Okay, Mr. Freyes offers on the second page of his handout in the conclusion section as an amendment the changes as outlined by that red line. Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Giarrusso. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Could we have a signal of hands, please? Okay, for Representative Giarrusso, Ms. Jones, Mr. Freyes, and Senator Hodgson. All opposed? Nay. The remainder of the committee and the motion to amend fails. Are there any other amendments to be offered at this time? Okay, we are back on the original motion to accept the report as amended now.
So move.
So moved by Chairman McCaffrey, seconded by Representative Lally and Senator Goodwin. All in favor?
Aye.
Is there any opposition? Mr. Freyes. And with that, the report is accepted. I would like to thank very much all of the members of the public that came out to testify, certainly the staff, who's done a wonderful, wonderful job, and all of the members of the committee, particularly the members of the public that have taken a lot of time out of their very busy schedule this summer to engage in this important process. So thank you all very much. We are adjourned, and that will conclude the committee's work. Thank you very much.